Welcome. So this is prototype thinking, the process and the story. We have been around for about 8 or 9 years now, and we have worked with a lot of organizations and are practiced in a lot of countries around the world at this point. I want to dive in and tell you one of my favorite stories about someone who did prototype thinking. I came to this methodology from the design thinking world because I'd been frustrated with some aspects of it. And one of the things that I heard a lot when you learn about design thinking is you hear these stories about, and then the companies sat down their designers and they came up with this beautiful idea, this amazing product. And this happens, I guess, almost more in product, really, right? And it's up being like a 1 in a million situation. You're like, I really wish I could do that, but like our industry is different or our circumstance is different. So what I love about Avital's story is that it really is more a story of how the sausage actually gets made, and it's realistic, and it's interesting, but it's not necessarily as sexy as like famous product development stories are. So Avital ran a high-end food tour business in several major cities in the US back before the pandemic. And their service was they were connected to a bunch of specialty restaurants, and it ran these tours for foodies who would come in. They would get a great food experience, but they would also get a behind the scenes experience with chefs, with kind of famous executive chefs. They'd get to see the gardens that were behind the restaurants. They would get to see how interesting and unique cuisines were made. And it was something that was very, very well rated, like priced on the high end. People tended to really love it. And it was a wonderful experience, right? And you actually got to kind of see the back rooms and connect with what was really going on behind in a restaurant. And then the pandemic hits, right? So back in 2020, we all remember, right? Everything changed overnight. And especially for a business like theirs, overnight, their revenue went to absolutely zero. Because if you remember the first few months before we knew about masking and before we started controlled reopening and social distancing and all of that, right? Everybody was staying home the entire time. And so their business was in the most sensitive part of the most sensitive industry, right? They were not just in food, they were in tourism and food at the same time. It was all based on in-person interactions, and they had a day-by-day revenue cycle with no like subscription base or anything like that. They immediately realized that, like many other people, they had a catastrophe, right? So Avital got her team together days after lockdown, and she immediately said, well, this is a completely new environment. It's going to be around for a while, and we have no idea what to do. We know that we can't be in the food tour business anymore, but we have to be in business. We know that nobody is going out and everybody is slashing their budgets, both individuals and businesses. And we just genuinely have no idea what to do, right? But let's figure it out. So she got her team together and they generated a bunch of ideas for what to do using their expertise and their existing resources to try to sell something. And if you, again, remember the first few months of that period in 2020, some of these might seem familiar to you. One of the most obvious things to do was go run online parties. And so you just have everybody logging in on Zoom, send everybody something, and they're all kind of socializing at the same time. One of the big things they tried was Chef Talks, which is having their famous executive chefs do custom video webinars for people who would then sign up and log in and maybe try to cook a food alongside the chef while he made it and try to learn from experienced chefs. They did a lot of online cooking classes, and they tried like, well, what if, we focus something around truffles, then we'll like send the special ingredients to everyone just via Instacart. And then at least it's a way that they can kind of come in and participate all together on Zoom. So there are a lot of experiments that they ran like this. These 3 to 4 were the most common categories of different ideas that they tried. So let me ask you guys, do you love any of these ideas? Like, is this something where you look at one of these and you're like, yeah, I definitely want a Chef Talk on Zoom or something like that? Has anyone done an online cooking class? I really tried to get my mind blown, but that was not the experience that I had either. Here's another question. Do any of these ideas sound especially innovative? And it's interesting because we tend to think of innovation as something that comes out of brainstorming, right? Like we need a brilliant new idea to go solve our problem or go solve, our perk flexibility, right? So let's come up with some innovative ideas, right? Or, oh God, our business is gone. Let's come up with some innovative ideas. And they sat down, and these are, these are culinary industry people, right? And they came up with these ideas, and they were kind of meh, right? And they were not, I would not call them innovative, right? So now I'm going to tell you that the story ends with Avital building a multi-million-dollar business and hiring 50 new people during the worst part of COVID. And her business grew so much that they exceeded their highest pre-pandemic revenue by many, many times over. So the next question is, which idea got them there? Which idea got them to that explosive growth during the worst part of COVID? Trick question. The answer was none of them. This is how they got there. So first of all, they built a bunch of really low effort mock-ups, right? So they wanted to try these things. So instead of actually launching any of these ideas like every other company, they launched flyers about these ideas. And this is actually a very pretty flyer, but it's only because she built it in Canva, which automatically lets you do this. And it took her like 15 minutes to build this. This is an example of when they were trying to experiment with Chefnage, right? They tossed this together in like 15 minutes. They called a couple of chefs, they picked some random pricing, right? And then they sent it to a bunch of customers. They did this for like 100 ideas over the first few weeks of the pandemic. So, and they actually got themselves on a cadence where every day they would toss out new combinations of things, send them to a few customers that they knew or an audience that they already had, and and then call those people, get their feedback on it, and then all get together at the end of the day and say, okay, you tried this, we tried this. Did any of this have traction? Okay, they liked this part of this, but not this other part. And then as people started buying in, and if anybody decided to buy a Chef and R, they would quickly just toss a bunch of vegetables into an Instacart or into a kind of mailing box and just ship it over to them, right? And then just run that one thing. So they didn't really build any of the products in the traditional sense where they didn't scale it. They were literally manually tossing carrots into shipping boxes for every single person who bought a thing, right? Because there were so many different variations of the thing that it wasn't like scaling wasn't conceivable at that point, right? They didn't want to build a production infrastructure for something that they didn't know if it was going to hit or not. And then, if people started liking it, they would bother to go back and refine the pitch a little bit and then start seeing if they can sell it to a dozen more people. And so over time, over several weeks, things started to solidify after hundreds and hundreds of changes. And they started to land on a few options. And at that point, they made a really interesting discovery. So what they found out was, well, first, food kind of fizzled, but alcohol really took off. So there were always a few people who are the foodie people, right, who like the food and would buy it, but it never hit enough interest for enough people because it's just so much lower friction to say, oh, I want to go on a food tour today. Like anybody would enjoy a food tour, right? But you have to be like really foodie to appreciate food so much that you appreciate it over Zoom. But everyone liked alcohol. So alcohol did really well. The other thing that they learned is that a small number of people bought the same Blackberry Bramble cocktail workshop over and over again. So the idea of the workshop was they got like a really charismatic bartender. It was an hour. They shipped them the Blackberry Bramble ingredients, and the bartender kind of joked with them and talked and explained how to build the cocktail, and then they all drank it. Which when I describe it that way, it sounds kind of okay, right? Like it sounds like the same level of kind of okay as all the other ideas. So like, why are like these like dozen people buying like 17 of them? And so Avital calls them and she's like, hey, I like you and clearly you like us. I've noticed that you had like 7 Blackberry Brambles now. And you definitely like don't need the same bartender to teach you how to make them anymore. And also you can clearly get the ingredients cheaper on your own in Instacart. It's like, what's the story? Like, why are you buying them? And so apparently what was going on is that these are all salespeople who are entertaining their clients. And these are all people who are all, again, stuck in remote, but they're still working their corporate jobs, selling their $1 million enterprise software packages to clients who are still also working their corporate jobs. But now these salespeople can't fly out. They can't wine and dine the client and hold these meetings and take them out to bars and clubs and do all of these special things that they would normally be doing to woo their clients. They have to somehow do all of the wooing only on Zoom. And so they need to create this high-end special experience that is fun and feels unique. This kind of essentially like the back room, like, oh, we're not really talking about business. We're just going to have some drinks and have a little bit of business here and there type of way that sales has always been done. And what happened was they realized that they had made a false core assumption at the beginning, which is everyone talked about how everyone's budgets were slashed in 2020. But the thing was that actually wasn't true, especially with the way the budgeting cycles work. Everyone had the same budget, but now they couldn't spend that budget on travel and lodging and dining and all of those things. So all of these salespeople had these same enormous decadent sales budgets that they always had, but they could only spend them on online experiences. So the feedback that Avital actually got when she started drilling into deep conversations with these salespeople was that actually they wanted a much, much higher end product and they wanted to pay for it. So if you remember like all of these other cooking and workshops we did and the activities and the yoga and the online courses and whatever, and they were all about like $20 to $30 a person. The salespeople actually had budgets that were closer to around $500 a person, and they were willing to pay it for a fancier product. So at that point, Avital Tours ditched their consumer side, focused and doubled down on their enterprise product. And by charging around $500 per person, they were able to do all of this really special stuff, get famous award-winning celebrity bartenders to come in, right? Like hire really experienced social facilitators to come in so that the person bartending isn't even the same person as the group facilitator. Yeah, so they got like very fancy packaging that they were able to kind of splurge on. So they started going to this and they quickly had to hire and hire and hire at a time in which everyone was laying off or getting furloughed. And they were able to employ 50 new people during this time. And they actually ended up having restructuring everything. They built a fulfillment warehouse optimized for corporate sales experiences. Yeah, they have there's the special moment of opening cool packaging for the clients. And they went from this for 15 minutes in Canva to building an entire infrastructure that at 10 times the cost on that. They had off the chart success. I love this because this sounds innovative to me. Part of why it sounds innovative is that there is something here that's magical and that works. And what works is that if you go and you have a drink because that's something fun you want to do once, that's an okay experience. But if you do it while you're at work, that's a completely different experience. And the reason that this worked and all those other ones didn't was the client was like, well, I could be having my celebrity bartender Blackberry Bramble on my work hours, or I could be doing other stuff. So between the need for the salespeople to do this and the need for the client to actually be in a different context, it creates a very different experience, even though it is actually 80% the same elements as the ones that we all turned up our noses at. So today, Avital's business is featured a lot in the New York Times for their turnaround and other things. They're a lot bigger than they've ever been before. And they are the leading vendor of high-end corporate culinary experiences. And also in the last year, they've pivoted again, and now they're back to doing it both in person and online. There are a lot of things going on there. What did we learn from this story? So the first is we can just go ahead and say, really, I have no idea what's going on, and then dive in and just try it. One of the things that allowed her to get ahead at a time in which a lot of businesses were struggling is that she wasn't afraid of just diving in and trying a bunch of stuff. And she took a mediocre guess, especially at this early stage when we're really not sure what the entire thing looks like. It's not about being right, because almost any guess we make is likely to be wrong. Pretty much any guess we take is inevitably wrong. In the absence of the ability to take a good guess, we take a mediocre guess. And for us, we ran a lot of Pivot Your Business workshops during the pandemic because we just really wanted to help all of the small businesses that were struggling. And one theme that came up again and again is that for the first time, you're on a level playing field. with everybody and with the big players, because nobody has solved this problem before. So there are no good guesses. There are only bad guesses. You're solving a problem that is in a sense unsolved by humanity. So there are only mediocre guesses. So that's okay. So we are just going to go take them. And then we're just going to try all of them at once. Everybody has a different mediocre guess, and we're just going to toss them all out. But we only use effort that is commensurate to how confident we feel, right? If great, really educated 90% confident guess, I would be ready to toss in a month of development on it. But if I have a maybe this guess, I'm tossing in a 30-minute Canva on it. If I have, okay, 2 people bought my 30-minute Canva flyer, then I'm tossing in like a few onions into a box level of effort at it. So what we'll come back to again and again when we do this workshop together is that you guys will be building prototypes at increasingly higher levels of effort. But at the very beginning, we're going to be very, very low effort. We also learned that there's a part of everything that works out. There's a little bit of a shipping component. There's a little bit of a somebody talking online component. There's a little bit of a doing food together component. So we take the parts that work and then we discard the rest. We're like, okay, the thing here that seems to be functioning is the core sales experience. So let's make it about that. And then not worry about all of the other things that we tried. We're completely unattached to the 95% of them that were wrong. The whole point of tossing them all out there and trying everything is to find those little sparks and then build something new, completely new out of the sparks. And then suddenly you're in the warehouse and fulfillment business, but you know that you're scaling the right thing. Which gets us to the last and most critical principle that we talk about, which is find the magic moment. And we really believe that a good product or service or solution really is this visceral sense of deliciousness. It's like, 5 seconds of magic or this kind of ongoing flavor that's different than everything else, that has this kind of fundamental, visceral, like practical impact in the person's life and makes them come forward and makes their eyes light up. And what we say is the entire product really is that magic moment that we're looking for. And then everything else is about enhancing that. Everything else, the ideas, the prototypes are just getting us to that one piece of information. And that's the thing that we scale. But how do we literally get there? And how do we know that something is a magic moment? This is our core magic moment evaluation tool. So we ask on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is horrible, 10 is mind-blowing, and 5 is like, it's fine, it's acceptable, it's normal. How valuable was this experience for you? We're looking at this particular scale, which is different than a Net Promoter Score scale. It's different than a typical 1 to 10 scale, because if you ask somebody like on a 1 to 10 scale, how much do you like this? They'll be like 8 when they really mean like it was totally normal, but if I rate you lower, I'm afraid you'll lose your job. People inflate up. So this is a non-inflated scale, a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is horrible, 10 is mind-blowing, and 5 is normal. How valuable was this experience for you? So I'm going to run you guys through an experiment that we have at this point run with a lot of times. When Uber first came out, if you think about that rating scale, how valuable was it for you? And Uber as a company has a lot of complicated issues, but we have been running this for so long with Uber, we're pretty much tied into it like forever. When Uber first came out, how valuable was it for you on that 1 to 10 scale? The second question is, on the same scale, how valuable was taking a cab? So we've asked this question now to thousands and thousands of people. And so typically Uber scores around an 8. In certain cities, it'll score around a 9. And cabs typically landed around a 3. But what we found is that if we have a 3-point offset between the experience that you're building and the status quo, that's a sort of tipping point for creating an experience that is good enough that it overcomes the friction of behavior change. And it creates enough of like that's kind of where the magic moment lives, right? It's good enough that marketing stops being an uphill battle and it becomes word of mouth referral. And it's enough that it's striking enough to people that it's worth converting. And that's really interesting because you would think that if you built a better product, then people would convert. But if I'm drinking water from like a cup and my cup is a 5, and then somebody else gives me another cup that's a 6, like that's not enough to override my cup using experience, right? Like I'd rather, or to buy new cups that are slightly better. I just mostly just keep the cups I have. A cup is a cup, right? But if somebody gave me a cup that was like a 9, every time I drink it, it feels great in my hands. I'm getting better hydration, beautiful. It makes me really happy. And there's this deliciousness about it. Like that's enough for me to maybe actually bother to buy this new set of cups. And a lot of the time when we work with companies, we find that people are really aiming for like a 7 versus a 5. And that still kind of isn't enough. And the tipping point is around a minimum of 3-point offset. Uber has 5 points, which is part of why we feel like, you know, the adoption makes it grow really, really easily, right? Because 5 is pretty much unheard of. Like it's an amazing number to achieve an offset by. Often in enterprise software, you're looking for closer to 4 points. And again, that doesn't have to be always against a 5. It doesn't mean you're always shooting for an 8, right? So for example, like if I said going through airport security for me is maybe like a 3. It's not the best. It's not the absolute worst. But if I had somebody gave me an airport security experience that was a 6, which is just kind of like, this is mildly pleasant, right? Like I would be all about that. But on the other hand, if I already really like something, if it's already a 7 for me, then it really has to blow my mind in order for me to change out of it. So now we know what a magic moment is and how we define and how we evaluate it. Now, the real question is, how do we go out and find it? So this is a light bulb. And so I work in innovation and I get a lot of light bulb imagery in my world. I go to conferences and people hand me business cards that all have light bulbs on them. I don't think innovation works like this, right? I think it works more like this. Like, I think it's a giant mess. It's a huge pile. There's a lot of things going on. You know, you try a million things, you know, exactly like Avatal did. Some of them work, you lose track of like half of them or more, right? You make PowerPoints and then nobody looks at them. Sometimes, you know, you get like conflicting information from different people, they're conflicting mandates. And it's just kind of this pile where you're not really sure what to do and it's not obvious how it happens. We call this this period of development the intangible zone. It's like, I know I want to be here, but what does the space look like, right? It's like, it tends to live around after we've done some initial research, the beginning of a project, and then we're like somehow supposed to get to a product market fit and a great design, but there's just like a kind of, how do we even get there? But I think that's okay, because it doesn't matter how much of the mess there is, as long as we produce one thing that works. There's a saying, if a hitman is after you, the hitman only needs to win once, but you have to win every time. So I think of innovation as like reverse hitman. You can lose as many times as you want, as long as you win once. And somewhere in this pile is the like beautiful winning polished magic moment solution. So we just need to go out and find it. And we find it by systematically asking and testing a lot of questions. And so this gets into our literal process is essentially entirely optimized around how we go from tons of million mediocre ideas to finding that successful solution. So in contrast to the kind of classic intangible zone process, this is how our process works. So we look at a metric we call confidence, or the confidence in the solution. And we say we're very, very good at a very specific thing. We are not a generalized design process, and we do not replace a typical product into design process. We come in right when a business has this broad mandate. What does it literally look like? And we leave with a validated solution of what it literally looks like. And from there, we run 3 or more cycles of our specific type of experimentation and testing in order to really beeline feeling confident about finding that solution. So this is what we mean by confidence, and this is kind of our guiding metric. So we say on a scale of 0% to 100%, if you were to take your current best guess at how to design this thing, how confident are you that your current best guess is the right answer? Okay, so this is how confidence typically goes. Confidence increases in direct proportion to the number of users that we test with. Nothing else increases confidence. Talking about it does not increase confidence. Getting buy-in from your superiors does not increase confidence. Thinking really hard about it doesn't increase confidence. You can get maybe 5% from doing that, but true confidence can only be increased by direct interaction with users. This is a kind of a typical project process. How you feel about it may go up and down in little curves, essentially. And this little light yellow bit here is false confidence, which often happens at the beginning of a project where we don't know much about it yet. We're like, yes, I feel like I know what's going on. And then you run your first year's of test and you're like, never mind, I have no idea what's going on. They hate everything. This is kind of our transformation and testing cycle. We ask questions, we build prototypes, we user test, and we analyze them, and we turn them into new questions. So the relaxing thing to know is that you can never get more than 50 or 20% confident in one step of work, no matter what you're doing. And I come from a context where I felt like I had to be a straight A student. I felt like I had to get all the answers right. Right. And that often happens for us, I think, in our work culture and in our business cultures. We feel like we don't want to show something to people, or we don't want to present something to our colleagues or to users or to customers until we feel like we can get an A on it, or maybe a B on it. Right. And that's like 80 to 90% on it. So then what can often happen is that if we're sitting here at like 25% confident, we start taking actions that we hope will get us to 90% confident in one step. And that is really, really stressful, really difficult, really time consuming, and also impossible. Because from where we sit, we simply don't have the perspective that is built from the 90%. That we do when we're at 80% going to 90%. Right? Because unlike taking a test, right, or doing work that people have done before, it's not a solved problem, right? And when you're in this uncharted territory, solving a problem that humanity has not solved before, we have consistently found over hundreds of projects that you can only get about 15 to 20% in one step. That's actually really great because it liberates us. It means that instead of saying, how do we build the right pick your perk solution? What we're really asking ourselves is, what can I do as quickly and cheaply as possible to get to 40% confident on this design? Knowing that is my only possible goal, how do I get to 40% confident? Then once we're there, how do I get to 50% confident? So that is the gist of it. That's the journey we're going to be on. That's the mindset and process we're going to be using. And we're going to guide ourselves by moving in 15% confidence increments, staying really close to users and testing a million different things with users, making a lot of big changes, and looking for the magic moment.